Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Andy Rich. I'm the president of AIGA Houston. This is day 8 of our Design Week. Our weeks have 9 days in them, so us. I'd like to see a quick show of hands of, has anybody here been to every Design Week event that we've had? Board members don't count. You, sir, thank you. We have one. Right on. Anybody who's been to at least 3? Couple more people. All right. Alex, you don't count either. Well, we are going to try to have a Design Week every couple of years. This is the second one that we've had. It's been an honor. It's been really exciting to put this on, and to, the running theme that we've had for our Design Week has been intersections between design disciplines, different cultural applications, and tonight's we'll be touching on that as well. Tonight we are going to be presenting Dongping Wong of Family and Archie Coates IV of Playlab. I want to thank a couple of people before we get started. You may have noticed all of the really cool branding elements that we've had for the coasters and t-shirts and everything. The brand identity system for Design Week was developed by Mollet Geyser. Please give them a round of applause. I also want to thank a big late donation from Specialty Printing, who donated all of the printed materials for Design Week. Thank you, them. And a big, huge thank you to the Contemporary Arts Museum of Houston, who was a major partner for us the last time we did Design Week. In fact, we could not have done a Design Week last time at all if it was not for the cooperation and support of the CAM. So you guys have a Design Week because of them. So big round of applause for the CAM. The title sponsor for tonight's event is Gensler, and we'd like to give them just a moment to say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. I promise I will be brief. Sponsoring an event like this is the easy part. Obviously, organizing it, having people jet in like these two gentlemen here, that's the hard part. We're happy to do it. I think we got a half dozen or more of us. My colleagues are here, and I got tapped to say a few words. So at a personal level, this is a really interesting event for me. One, because it's interdisciplinary, as you mentioned, but 10 years ago, I was invited by a personal friend to an AIGA talk at the Firehouse up in the Heights, and the guy speaking was John Bricker, who's a brand strategist from our New York office, and I was completely blown away. I like to credit him and this event for actually recruiting me to Gensler. And that's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Would also like to thank two of our supporting sponsors tonight. Primer Gray, who you may have noticed have been putting little pieces of paper on all of your seats. They have a study, a design-related study that they're doing that they would like your participation in. They're also, you may have noticed a couple of months ago, coming to some of our events, and you've seen a couple of raisin cakes walking around with unicorn masks. That was those guys, so we love them. Also, for 30 Magazines, who are going to be having a special event later this evening, which we will tell you about in just a bit. At this time, I would like to introduce my good friend and AIGA Houston's Director of Chapter Development, Tyler Swanner, to introduce tonight's speakers. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming. We're really excited about Dong and Archie talking tonight. Before I introduce them, I did want to say really quickly that, as Andy mentioned, the Contemporary Arts Museum has been a really crucial partner for us in every Design Week thus far. This year is no exception. As you can see, the show around you that's up right now, Texas Design Now, is really special, and you should definitely come back and check it out at some point. It's up through November 29th, I believe. And then also tomorrow, the CAM has a really interesting panel discussion with Kate, who designed the fashion that you see here, and also Angel, who designed the ceramics that you see, and then Alice, who designed some of the other fashion in the show, and they're going to talk tomorrow, and it's going to be really nice. That's at 2 p.m. here, so you may want to come check that out. To introduce these gentlemen, we were talking today, and I told them, like, I'm going to introduce you tonight, but I don't know like what I'm going to say, or, I don't want to read your bio. And they said, dude, just talk about how we ate queso today. And then on the bio thing, just like show our LinkedIn profiles on screen. And so this is Dongping Wong's LinkedIn profile, and he has 456 connections. And then this is Archie's, and he has 500 plus. He's topped out. Like once you hit 500, they don't go anymore on that. So their work is going to speak for itself. We're so excited to have them here, and you're really in for a treat. So let's give them a very, very hot, humid, sweaty, sticky, warm Houston welcome.
So I'm Dong, that's Archie. We're going to try something that we've actually never done. We work on a fairly large project together, which we'll get to at the end. But we've actually never presented together like this. So what we're going to try to do is basically go through some of our work, which is from an architecture office. Archie's going to go through some of his work, which is not an architecture office. It's basically everything else besides architecture. And then we're going to try to somehow talk about one project together, and we don't really know how it's going to work. So I'm going to go through just 5 projects of ours just to give you a sense of what we do and kind of why we do what we do. Really simply, we're an architecture office, and basically our sort of MO is to do a really simple thing, which is just to design buildings that make things better. It sounds really dumb. It actually is very dumb. But for us, it's actually really important as you go through it and you work through all of the nuances of architecture and getting a building done to constantly refer back to this and make sure what you're doing is actually making the city better, making your projects better for the people using it. And we wanted to keep it simple. So a few projects like that. For example, one that we actually did in Dallas, a competition, was a housing block that simply creates energy for the city. So what we looked at was your kind of typical high-rise in Dallas and your kind of situation of the kind of typology of the buildings, and said, is there a different way to develop a series of housing there? One of the things we noticed is that Dallas is a pretty windy city. When wind actually hits the corner of a building, the velocity increases quite a bit. And so was there a way to actually take a typical building, cut it in a way, and actually increase the amount of energy you could create across that surface? So in this case, it's wind and solar, and all we simply did was basically turned rectangles into triangles, basically. But what it did was it increased the amount of surface area we could use to the point where we not only had a kind of different type of building, but a building that was able to, at least in our calculations, generate enough energy to not only supply clean energy for the 600 units of housing in the block, but actually start selling renewable energy back to the city. And we started developing a business model basically for this, where even selling some of that back to the city could help some of the financing of the project. And this was one of the very early projects we did, with obviously a large series of environmental consultants, but something that took that idea that a building could be productive, could actually be sort of a citizen of the city, let's say, and gave back to the city as a starting point for a lot of our other work. Another one we actually just finished on a totally different scale is simply just it's a retail store, it's a clothing store in Hong Kong. But if anybody's been to Hong Kong, you'll know it's a combination of incredibly lush jungle and incredibly dense city, basically. And so what we wanted to do was, in this really dense shopping area, which I guess is actually most of Hong Kong, was there a way to kind of take that split personality and make the store based on that kind of nature and concrete? And so what we did was we just simply divided this shop in half. The first half is basically a jungle. The back half is what we call the quarry, but it's basically just poured concrete. And that split for us was really, the main reason we wanted to do this was, A, the client was surprisingly flexible in letting us not bother trying to sell any clothes in the store. I mean, it's surprisingly apparently successful in terms of selling clothes, but that wasn't he didn't task us with that. What we wanted to do was basically bring a piece of park or a piece of jungle to the street. And so we've actually fought for a while to keep this is from the street looking in. There's no door, it never shuts. The weather seal is in the back there when it turns into the quarry part. So what we liked is that on this street, which is full of kind of your typical high-end luxury retail frontages, you've just got a little patch of jungle that you can kind of hang out in. And that was really the only kind of driver behind this, but what was to kind of give a breath of fresh air, I guess, to the city. In this case, it's a pedestrian bridge, and this is actually really simple. All it is it's in Slovenia in a town called Maribor, and it's a beautiful site, a really historic city center on the right, and the ask was for a pedestrian bridge to cross basically next to this large steel regular bridge, non-pedestrian car bridge. And so what we did was there a way you could make it kind of fun? Instead of just straight crossing across, was there a way where you could actually experience the river and experience the bridge and actually make that crossing kind of an event in itself? And so we just did a big circle. And so part of it was not only interacting with the existing infrastructure and crossing as you go through, but just this sense of sort of floating over the water as you drift across. We worked with a couple of bridge engineers to start developing a structural system that kept it as light as possible. And so you really get this effect of, I guess, almost floating over the water was our hope as you kind of do this big loop. This one is a museum in Finland. And again, it's really just looking at the existing site. In this case, it's kind of on an island, and the island is basically surrounded by some incredible settings, some incredible nature. And the ask was, it's a little hard to tell, but there was a series of small buildings, these guys with a pitched roof, that were already part of the existing museum, and what they wanted to do was increase the amount of gallery space 4 times. And so all we did was, sorry, this slide explains a little better, plant a few galleries around the site and then connect everything with a pathway. It's a little washed out, but this model shows that museum sort of moving through the landscape. So you'd have new build, and as the path kind of moved you through the landscape, it not only connected to existing, but showed you view around the island. So our thought was basically with this site, the art the landscape around was kind of as interesting as the art they were presenting. And even in the galleries, we wanted to make sure you always had a kind of connection to that outside. And the other thing we wanted to do was, instead of creating a separate building away from the existing, was to actually use this to create almost a mini town center in the middle of this hill. So the idea that the center could be programmed with a lot of kind of arts cultural programming was important for us. And then lastly, I don't know how to describe this one, so I just did a really long sentence. We basically worked with, we've done a lot of work with Kanye West, and this is particularly one that we did for the last tour that came, I think it actually came through Houston. And it was for the Yeezus album. And so the idea was to take what would typically be a kind of stage set, and how do we create an environment out of it, and us coming at it from a building standpoint, how do you also create something iconic? So this is the actual built final stage set, and this is the very first sketch we presented. This is probably the most direct sketch to realization we've ever done. And all it really is basically a big mountain and a giant LED sun. And the idea was that through those two elements, you could create all these different kinds of atmospheres and environments. So these are some of the studies we did, and sort of trying to sequence out the show. And one of the ideas we had was actually the mountain would split open at some point and become a volcano. His addition to that was actually to have Jesus, literally an actor portraying Jesus, to walk out of the mountain, which is pretty nuts. And also, I don't remember if it was his idea or our idea to throw a giant face of his, probably his idea, I'd imagine. And then, things like getting beamed up to a spaceship, fun stuff like that. So then this is another real shot of, there's a piece of this mountain that actually sticks out in the audience and kind of moves up and down as he performs. So you can kind of see actually the seam in the middle is where it splits. I don't think I actually have any photos of Jesus, unfortunately. But what we liked is, I think the effect was pretty, well, one, for us, it was the first, and unless we do this again, probably the only time you'd have a building where you could watch 16,000 people freak out in front of your building every night. We like to think it was for our building, of course, and not for him. But it was also something that I think, especially because of the giant sun, really created a kind of more atmospheric and engulfing environment than we had anticipated, and also I think more than other stage sets we'd seen. So this is not me. This is Archie. He's going to cuss his way through some Playlab stuff. All right, good. Here you go. Nice.
I'm going to do my best not to cuss, but I already did. So this is kind of the theme of the talk, and this is kind of the theme of, I guess, my life and my friend's life, I guess. This is me on the left. I was 3 years old, 2 years old, not too sure. This is my best friend in the world, Jeff Franklin. We grew up in different places, but obviously our parents were like-minded and dressed us the same, which is sort of, you know, important for what happens later on in life. We did end up growing up, became a little bit more emotional later in life. This is sort of a darker phase that we went through. Growing up, both of us, I think the point of this photo is that we grew up in kind of polar environments. I grew up surfing and listening to punk rock music and being in punk bands, and he grew up listening to Dave Matthews and, I don't know, playing golf, I think, for the most part. But the cool thing is that we were both unified over a couple different artists, big obvious ones like Keith Haring and Andy Warhol, and for me, Frank Lloyd Wright. My parents weren't the most artistic, but they exposed me to these books at a super young age and got me really excited about the idea that a pencil and my brain could make anything that I wanted in the world, and they didn't really say that I could not do anything. And so when they asked me what did I want to do for the rest of my life, I said skateboard, and when they said no, I said architect, and they said sure. So I went to Virginia Tech, where I met Jeff. In that first freshman year, they introduced us to Charles and Ray Eames. And the thing that was important about introducing us to Charles and Ray Eames was that Charles and Ray Eames didn't bother with building a brand around a specific genre of work. They just fucking made things that they wanted to make. Toys, films, animations, buildings, furniture, invented new processes for manufacturing. Nothing would really stop them from doing things that they were interested in doing. If they didn't have a client, they made it. And that is what we were taught. We were taught that design was this thing, and art were these two things or tools that allowed us as people and human beings to explore the things that we were interested in and actually build those things for the sole purpose of seeing what it was like to see them made, kind of like the mountain. I saw the mountain and it was spiritual. They said one important thing, which was they didn't believe in this concept of the gifted few. That they just believed in people doing things that they were truly interested in doing, and that in somehow, some way, they would find a way to be good at that. Around that same time, we were introduced to Jean-Claude and Christo, not in real life because they weren't alive, but in books again. And I got obsessed with the fact that a man could make a living or have a great life from wrapping things with fabric and plastic or whatever. And that he had this innate desire, and that desire just grew, and he toiled away at it, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. At some point, he wrapped trees, and eventually, in 1983, after 10 years, he surrounded these islands in Miami off the coast of Biscayne Bay with miles and miles of fabric that had not yet even been invented, and for the sole purpose of having a 2-week installation. And when asked why he did it, because he met so much criticism and backlash and people trying to get him to not wrap these islands in these skirts. When asked why, he said, because it'll be beautiful. And I just thought that was so cool. After lawsuits, dozens of engineers, conversations with city council, they eventually built it. But the cool thing was that not what it looked like per se, which is awesome, but how it was made. It was completely financed through the sale of these drawings, which are beautiful in and of themselves. And at the time, in 1983, he was contributing more to the arts in America than Philip Morris and ExxonMobil were, which were the top 2 companies in the world giving to the arts, which says something about starting from wrapping a book and a motorcycle to some trees to some fucking islands. Wrapping it was awesome, but the thing that I learned, both the drawings and everything else, was that the why is really important, but the how is extremely important. And one big argument that happened in the making of this project, which inspired us and Dong and I especially with this project we're going to talk about, Plus Pool, was that people were saying, well, you're going to kill all these manatees on the island, and you're going to ruin the plant life. And they were finding any reason for it not to happen. And what ended up happening was that it was the biggest environmental cleanup in the history of Miami in order to make this thing happen, which is a side note in having such a beautiful thing happen. So Jeff and I moved to New York in 2007 with the intention of opening an office called Playlab where we could make whatever the fuck we wanted to make without anybody telling us we couldn't. Not knowing what we would make, but knowing that we would have an adventure and at some point we would die, and in between that time we would make some things and meet some people. This photo is extremely relevant because we just added a third partner, which we never thought would happen. So this was sort of our mantra from the beginning, that we would never waste time or money when we attempted to explore or understand something. And that's really important, especially for Pluspool, which we'll get to soon. One more quick example before getting in a few projects that are important to my life is in 1977, this dude named Carl Sagan and his future wife, Ann Droyan, launched the Voyager space program with NASA. And the purpose of this project was to send something into space. Well, I mean, it was to send a satellite into space and actually leave the solar system, which it just did, but was to send something into space that if intelligent life found it, they would know that humans exist, Earth exists, and we mean well. And so they sent a golden record called The Sounds of Earth, and they had the sounds of babies and Mozart and whales and you name it, which was such a beautiful, human, and expensive gesture to send out into the universe. There's no measurable way to see what sort of impact there was from this thing, except for now I'm here talking to you guys with my friend Dong. So that set the course, I think, for us, that like anything we do here on Earth is not ridiculous because this is the most ridiculous thing right here. So yeah, Playlab. Like Dong said, we're not architects, but we're designers and we're artists and we're creators. And for us, all these things that we can make, structures, buildings, apps, websites, books, you name it, they're all just vessels for ideas. Ideas are the thing that gets us very excited, and we're not too concerned the form that they take. We just want to understand how they happen, and we want to see them happen because it really, really fucking makes us happy. We've been together for 10 years, not romantically. We each have wives, happily married. And we've done 206 projects together at varying scales, varying degrees of success, a lot of them complete failures. But the whole goal was to see what we could get into, and most often try to get into areas of design and art and creating things that made us feel uncomfortable, quite frankly. Things that we don't really know how to do, but we want to figure out how to do them, because that's why we're alive. So 4 projects. I picked 4 disparate projects that were initiated by us and not asked of us from a client. The first of which is a record label. We moved to New York, we had no clients, we had a small office in Brooklyn, and nobody was paying us to do anything, but we wanted to make things. And one thing we really wanted to make, which we thought would be really attainable, is record covers. But there was no band asking us to make their record cover. So we decided to start a record label. We knew that we had friends and bands, and we had access to a little bit of cash, and we could spend all of our savings on actually producing records, which we did. This is my friend Alex, and we put out his first record. And it was a really fun exercise in building a world around an idea, having no experience in it. I mean, we understood how to do graphic design, and we understood how to pick up a phone. And so we did that. We learned how to press records and do photo shoots and send bands on tour and do web ads and T-shirts and you name it. It was a complete failure, and it was so fun. But the first thing we did was make a business card. We had no plan at all. I could not afford to put these business cards out. I think they cost $65 at the time. We did not give them to anybody. They're still in the studio. But we produced four vinyl records. This is the 7-inch. I actually flew to Sweden to meet the band. I had met them on MySpace. This is 2007, mind you. This is amazing because we were going through the phase of learning to be a designer outside of school and outside of an office, where we had to teach ourselves to not have anxiety about producing work, that design isn't about climbing a mountain to the idea. Design is about getting a bunch of shit out on the table and talking about it. And we had to go to the printer the next day, and it was late at night, and we were drinking beer, and we decided, the record was called Proud Sponsors of Pepsi, because Pepsi didn't sponsor them. They were sponsoring Pepsi, this punk band. So we decided to paint Jonathan's ass red, white, and blue in the name of Pepsi in the middle of the night, and it turned out well. We put out a record for a kind of a noise band in New York called Chubby Behemoth. They're now called PC Worship. And then a 7-inch for an idol of mine named Christopher Ostrom. So it was fun, but again, a failure. Second thing, Pie Shop. Completely different than a record label. In 2009, we went down to a town called Greensboro, Alabama. I had read about it in architecture school because there's a studio there called Rural Studio, started by this guy named Samuel Maccabee, who's also a radical individual. And this guy came back from doing his thesis in Greensboro, Alabama. His name was Keith. And he came back and he told the story of building a home for this woman named Lucy, who was an incredible woman. I had the chance to meet her. And this home was like one of the famous rural studio homes. It was built from carpet tiles. And what was so compelling about the story wasn't that the form was cool or that it looked great in photos. He told a complete story about a human being and her life and her kids, and it was so cool. And Jeff and I had just met, and we were like, we have to do work like that, that's about people. And so we went down to Greensboro when we opened the office. Jeff had quit his job where he met Dong, and we didn't have a ton of money, and we flew down to Alabama with some friends, and we wanted to do a project that we could immediately feel the impact, but also dealt with issues, but also was just fun. And we got down there, and we met a place that was the second poorest town in America, and racially divided and sad on so many levels. And we learned very quickly that our approach to design was meeting something that was so dark head on and finding the most beautiful thing in it and just pulling it out and making it bigger. And that's generally our design concept for every project. And so we went down there and realized pie was kind of the most cool and popular, safe thing. We opened a pie shop. A woman named Pam Dorr ran this the nonprofit called Hero, and she finds homes for people that can't afford them. And she gave us this schoolhouse and let us set up shop. So we baked a bunch of pie. We put a sign in the yard that said pie, lab, open. On the back side of it, it was spelled backwards. So if people came in, they'd be like, why is it spelled backwards? And then we'd say, do you want pie? And it was cool because people came in and it was awesome and it was spiritual, and we ended up getting a grant and buying a building, and it became the first business to open up in that town in 10 years and became a place where people could get their GED by actually working at this pie shop, and it became a really beautiful place that is still open today. But our this is awesome, baking contest, news at 10. But I was really zealous and excited that we could do something like that. I think we spent $600 to make it happen. And so I was like, my girlfriend had just moved to New York from me, and I went to Alabama to start this project. And now she's my wife, but probably because I didn't stay in Alabama. But I said I wanted to move to Alabama, and she said, no, you gotta move, you gotta come back to New York because I'm not going to Alabama. So I came back to New York and I started a magazine. Another disparate project, but I think we always wanted to make something in print, a book, and we thought, well, why not? And so we got together with some friends, and I think the observation was pretty simple, was that we wanted to see an architecture magazine that didn't address buildings and architecture so quickly because of Twitter and websites and blogs, even though that's fine. We were kind of tired of waking up in the morning and seeing a bunch of projects reduced to a single image and then going to the next project and going to the next project. And we wanted to sit down and address each project at a time and understand it through the lens of a singular topic. So we thought that most kind of websites and blogs and magazines were addressing multiple topics from a few voices. And we thought if we flipped it on its head and had 50 voices talking about one topic in print, not online, quarterly, and everybody got 2 democratically laid out spreads, that we could have a conversation about these things, and that it would be a catalyst for having physical conversations like in spaces like this. We had no idea how to do a magazine, to be totally honest. We designed this spread that Michael Beirut said looked like a PowerPoint presentation, which I take as a compliment. And we launched a book on The Office Big because he was getting so much traction online and using it to his advantage to actually gain work and status in the field. And we thought that would be a perfect thing. So we collected 50 responses to different things about Big and his office and the way he was operating. And we printed a PDF and gave it to Bjarke, and he sat down and reviewed each piece. And so the first issue was essentially people's thoughts and then his responses in the back. And we put it out into the world, spent a lot of money on it, kind of like the record label, and I honestly thought it was going to turn out like the record label. But it sold out in 2 weeks. We printed like maybe 1,500 copies, and it gave us enough money to print another issue. So we did an issue on the architecture of Apple because nobody had really sat down and collected all this information about Apple's contribution to the field of architecture, which is super massive, especially in the field of patents. And that thing sold out in 24 hours before we even sent it to the printer. And then it just kept happening. We reprinted it 4 times, and then we had something. We've now printed 14 issues. We've looked at a whole range of topics, and it's been a jumping off point to have these conversations like we hoped. The 4th issue, Rendering, enabled us to have our first exhibition as Playlab at the Art Institute of Chicago, where we had the Institute actually purchase and commission their first digital rendering for their permanent collection, and we had a whole show about typologies of renderings. To REM, which we had a small opportunity to be a very small part of the biennial this past year. And then today actually marks the launch of Landmark, which is our 14th issue, which is really beautiful and feels good in your hand. And if you want to come to the party tonight, we're having a launch party at Mongoose versus Cobra, 9 p.m. Which brings to the last project before Dawn comes back up and we talk about Plus Pool. But this is really exciting for me because from the very beginning, we've set out to do nothing in particular, no focus or particular type of design. We just wanted to get involved with ideas and to make them happen. And this is such a small idea that has taken 3 months of our time to produce. And it's the most exciting thing that I've worked on other than Plus Pool in recent years. And it's a simple observation that the artist and actor Joaquin Phoenix, his first name sounds really similar to the word walking. And if you watch any of his films, you'll find him walking in those films. But nobody has compiled them together in a way that tells a new story. So on October 8th, we are launching an exhibition called Walking Phoenix. That are simply strips of stills of Joaquin walking in his films. We've selected a few films. This is 3 outtakes from Her. And this is a letter we sent to his agent. I called his agent on the phone and I asked for his address and sent him a pair of shoes and asked him to walk by the gallery at a certain date and time. And that'll be the closing performance of the show. We're going to wait and see if he walks. And I know it's ridiculous in the light of all the other projects that I mentioned and the 206 you don't even know about. But for us, Playlab and what we do is about observing something super simple and beautiful and sharing that with everybody. And it doesn't matter what it is. I think the Joaquin Phoenix thing is amazing because it's such a simple observation. And if it's done well, and it goes out and it's in a gallery and somebody sees it, they say, I can do something. Just like when we saw Christo's trees. But more importantly, like a pool.
How do we do this? All right, so yeah, I'll have some water. So one of the, basically, I'd say the one thing we kind of shared in common when both of us started our offices was we had no work. It's probably a terrible reason to start an office, but it was a recession. We both started it basically right around the recession, and A, because the real jobs were not there, and B, because we actually, I don't know, we just wanted to start an office, I guess. But basically what that came down to is the shared kind of philosophy that Archie touched on a lot was we just had this desire to do rad shit, even though nobody was asking us to do rad shit. Like, you want to do stuff, you have no idea how to do it. Nobody is going to come up to you and ask you to build a gigantic Olympic-sized floating pool in the East River, but we wanted to anyway. And so what happened was we basically decided to do it together. So the project is called Plus Pool. I'm going to describe what it is, and Archie is going to describe how and why and basically like all the bullshit we've gotten ourselves into. So Plus Pool is, in the simplest terms, the world's first river filtering pool. It's called Plus Pool because it's shaped like a plus. And the kind of main thing about it is actually on a day-to-day basis, it filters over 600,000 gallons of river water just through basic use. It's basically like a giant strainer that you can drop in the river. Its walls, we're developing now a technology that the walls are basically made of filtration membranes. So literally water comes in through the walls of the pool, you swim in clean water, it gets filtered again because people are gross, and then 600,000 gallons goes back into the river as clean river water every day. So as a preface, none of us, and there's 4 partners on this, before this project had any experience with pools, any experience with water, in a design capacity anyway, any experience with anything plus-shaped, let alone doing anything this big in New York City. We were basically coming at this blind, but it seemed like a funny idea. This just kind of explains the concept again, the kind of walls acting as filtration, and big whales. We actually got yelled at by a bunch of people that told us these guys are idiots because clearly there's no whales in the East River. New Yorkers take their renderings very seriously, apparently. But the system's really simple. This is one of our very earliest diagrams, but it's still actually fairly the case. It's basically just a system of 3 different layers of materials, each one taking out smaller and smaller contaminants. So literally everything from rats and dead bodies down to bacteria and viruses, so they're actually swimming in clean water. And all of this is done, the goal is to do this without chemicals. 1, because we just don't like swimming in chemicals. 2, because all that water goes back to the river and we can't be dumping chlorine back into the river. But the point of it basically was twofold. 1 was just to see, could an office like ours with absolutely no right to do a project like this, could we actually do a project like this? And B, just for this experience, just the idea that you could, in the future, touch and swim and feel real river water in New York City, real river water that you stare at every day, but actually never ever think that it could be something you could swim in. It actually basically started because, how long have you been in New York? 9 years. So we've both been in New York a while. I've been around 12 or 13. Anyway, it took me like 7 years of living in New York to realize that the river water is water and not like a weird border between Manhattan and Brooklyn, not a thing that you simply go over or under to get somewhere else. What I think we realized is both of us basically grew up near or at the beach. And when you grow up near or at the beach, I'm in San Diego, he's at Virginia Beach, that your relationship to water is obviously very different. In New York, you never think about touching it. You think about maybe having a beer and staring at it, but you never actually think about like jumping into it. So we wanted to try to change that. It's something actually that New York has a big history of. About a century ago, the river was used not only recreationally, but actually as a place to literally bathe. Obviously, this is more the case now, and through industrialization, through general just chemical spills, everything, it's not a place you necessarily want to jump into. The main reason for that is because dotted around the entire city are things called combined sewage overflows. It's actually something super common in almost every major city on a waterfront. What it basically means is whenever it rains, the sewage system gets overloaded, and then raw sewage gets overflowed into the river. So if it rains, definitely stay away from the rivers. It also means that the water is basically classified not for swimming. You're not allowed to touch it. But what we wanted to do was, could we just carve out a little place in the river just as a test, just as a kind of example or model or catalyst to, again, returning to that river. So this is a version of it that's sitting outside Brooklyn Bridge Park. Sorry, it's a rendering in case anybody thinks it's real. Facing the city, of course. And what we've been doing over the last few years is doing an extensive amount of testing, focusing on that filtration system. What we've realized is we've gathered more data than I think anybody has ever gathered on the quality of the East and Hudson rivers. We basically sample about every 15 minutes because what we're building towards is when you go there as a swimmer, you can be able to look on your phone and see immediately not only what the cleanliness of the river or the water is in the pool, but also what the river is doing at any given time. And we're testing across 15 different parameters. The most important one to pay attention to is enterococci, which is basically literally human shit. There's a lot of human shit in the river, and our goal is to filter it out. So this is one test in 2011. We basically installed a filtration tank on Pier 3 at Brooklyn Bridge Park. Basically just ran water through. We're working with Columbia University, who's basically teaching us all about water quality and how to test it. And we set up a kind of pseudo-science lab down there for about 2.5 months. This last summer, we built a sort of science labby duct-taped version of the filtration system and launched it out at the Hudson River at Pier 40 and basically ran that for 3 months. And so what it's doing is bringing water in through the set of walls. You can kind of see these cartridges down here. And then we pump that up into another system that we can use to test all the water. And what it comes down to is this chart, which I know doesn't look very exciting, but the red is what the bacterial level is in the river over time. So you can see it jumps up quite a bit. There's certain times where it's just insanely off the charts. That's probably right after a rain. These two dotted lines are the quality standards that the City of New York and also the EPA regulate for what you can swim in. One is beach standard up top, one is pool standard at the bottom. What we were basically able to achieve was zeroing out all the bacteria regardless of what the river was doing. And as far as we know, this is the first time anybody has ever done this, which isn't that exciting because I honestly don't think anybody ever bothered trying to do this. But for us, it was great because it just meant that you can actually swim in the river. With all this data, we worked with Google to develop a pushable dashboard. Again, I think because we had no idea what all this data meant before we started, we also assumed that a lot of other people would have no idea what this data meant. And so we wanted to try to find a way where it was actually legible and kind of fun. And of course, eventually when the pool is in the water, that you can keep using this and kind of learn more about the river. And finally, last summer was the first time we actually jumped into actual clean filtered river water. Granted, the pool itself is a little ugly in this photo, but the river was clean anyway. Nice, good job, thanks.
Great project, Don. Great project. So for us, designing the way that it happens is equally important to the design of itself. And the project was designed in like a few months span of time in 2010 to where it's generally at now, except for the filtration system. In the past 5 years has been kind of working together to do what we do for any other project, but for raising money, calling people, making campaigns, etc. And it's really fun. There it is. At first, Don called us up. He had the idea to swim in the river and do this plus pool. And he asked us to help him kind of put it out into the world. Like, what does that look like? And we didn't know, really. We just knew that we needed to get to the core of what this project was and what it meant to us and what it could mean for the city. And so we spent basically a month building up that story as real and as transparent as possible. And we did what any kind of graphic designer does that we had in our toolbox, and we launched a website and we made a book and like 1,000 newsprint posters that we didn't know if like anybody would ever read, and sent it to everyone we knew, which was like maybe 100 or so people. And we sent on the back of these books here, it said like, we're looking for architects, marine engineers, anybody that can help us, basically, and send it to a bunch of wish list type people. And then we started getting calls kind of immediately. And one of the first was the Parks Department. And they said, come in and let us tell you that we don't have the money to pay for this, but it's super cool. And those conversations just kept happening. And then all of a sudden, a project that we thought was going to be, as we launched kind of as a lark and exist on our websites for a period of time, quickly became a thing that was taking up all of our time. Emails back and forth, us running into the city to meet with him to talk about like, oh, well, this person called, like, what do we do? It was a complete new frontier for us, and I'm sure for a lot of people in that same position. Anyways, within a week, we had like so many hits on our website that it crashed, and our server was like, you got to find a new server. And we got a call from Arup at the end of that week, a very large and awesome engineering office, saying, hey, like, we want to help prove that this is possible. And we thought that was kind of a joke, that somebody was pranking us or something. So within the first 2 weeks, we had the world's best engineer telling us that this could be possible and that we could go down this road together and figure out how it could work. But the important thing about all this press is that we had never really gotten any press. And we didn't know what that meant or how important it was. But what was so cool is that people started calling, and people started emailing, and people started to be interested in this vision of this thing, which just meant that they could jump into the river on a hot July. Jeff was interviewed on Chinese television. David Letterman talked about it in his monologue. He got a lot of facts wrong, actually. R.I.P. And this is kind of where everything started exploding. At some point, Arup gave us this stack of documents that said, it's possible. And it was, the stack was big, super thick. And said, this can happen. The first thing you got to do is prove that this technology works. And bummer for you, it doesn't exist. And we're going to have to figure out how to make it work. And so they said, okay, the first stage is just test part of it. And try to get some money for part of it. And so we're like, we don't know what to do. So we called up Kickstarter. They had just launched. Generally, our strategy with anybody is to ask them to go for a beer. And so we asked one of the 3 employees at Kickstarter to go have a beer. And she met with us, and she was like, yeah, you're probably not going to raise the $20 million you need to build this thing in 30 days. But you can get people really excited about it. And you can put it out there, and you could probably raise a little bit of money. So we put it up for $25,000, which no client had ever paid us. And didn't know if that would work. And within 6 days, we raised that money, and by the end of the 30 days, we raised 41 in 2011 on the left, which was spiritual because 1,203 people were giving us money for a thing that was just like an idea the year before. And then you saw the photos of us testing the human feces. Within like a few months, we were on a pier testing water, and it was real. It was tangible. It wasn't a goofy drawing or rendering. It was a real thing, and we were filling up these with water and testing them in a shipping container on the edge of the river. And at the end of that, we were like, okay, well, that worked. What now? And so we spent a year just trying to figure it out, banging our head against walls, asking anybody we knew, building support from city council members and all this stuff. And it was awesome, but at some point it was like, well, is it going to be real or is it not going to be real? Are you going to take the next step forward or not? And it was just too fun. It was just too fun to not do. And so our conversations have always been super positive. And we just really believe that this thing should exist. So called up Arup and decided we needed to build the whole filtration system and prove to the city that this worked and show them the data sets. And, bummer for us, that was going to cost $250,000. And we went back to Kickstarter, and fortunately we raised it in 30 days, which was insane. At my apartment every night, we borrowed Dong's projector, and we projected the Kickstarter on the wall. And at a certain point, we were calling friends and taking shots every $500 as things were as things were getting pretty hot and heavy. Ooh. And then the people, the 4 of us, that's a super important part because a good team is everything, and I think we finish each other's sentences very well. And have just built a really incredible team around it. And the support that's come around the project has been kind of exponential and amazing, and it kind of grows every day. We have this board of directors, which is really insane, which it's growing so fast that even this slide is outdated. But one of the biggest things for us is one of the first people we sent a book to that called us was Josh David, who founded the Highline with Robert Hammond in New York. And it was the only precedent project for us of somebody just kind of saying, well, what if we did this thing and it's going to cost millions of dollars and see if we can build it. And he brought us into the office. I wasn't even there. It was Dong and Jeff, and he basically was like, this is beautiful. I love the materials, like who designed it? And then he was like, but don't do it. Like, it's going to take so long. and I'm tired. Like, don't do it. He says today that he didn't ever say that, but he definitely did say that. And some point along the way, he decided, he wanted to join our board and help us carry it through and make it happen, which meant the world to us. He's sort of guru. We started a nonprofit now, so we got to the end where we proved that this technology works, and now we have it, and now we've got to raise money and actually give a stack of drawings to the city so they can stamp and say, you can go build it, and then we'll have to raise that money. And so it's a process, and it's super important how we go about it, which is talking like we're talking now, kind of bro-like, as we'll describe. But we decided to start a nonprofit because it made the most sense for us, and we had asked a lot of people about what to do, and they said, do it. So we got our paper in March. This is from the IRS, and this is our first hire. She's the deputy director of Plus Pool, which is pretty cool. Again, like, started as like a coffee shop conversation, and then we were hiring people for more than like we probably make a year to make sure that this project can happen. I think that was a huge kind of change in the project. And then constantly met with a list of names of people, individuals that support at any level from $1 to $25,000 or $100,000, whatever. Every single person is making this project happen, and it's a kind of a weird thing to see from the ground up. Do you want to talk about this part?
I think this order is super random. It's probably my fault. I apologize. The premise of the design is super simple. It's basically 4 pools stuck together into a plus shape. And the reason we wanted to do that was, A, it looked funny. B, we met so many different swimmers of different types that we wanted a place where everybody could come together basically and swim in this together. For example, none of us on the team are actually probably very good swimmers, but we like hanging out in pools and drinking beer. So we wanted to make sure we had a spot for that. And then there's a lap pool, there's a sports pool, and over on the left there's a kids pool. There's also the idea that at some points you can open this up completely as just sort of free-for-all. It's basically 50 meters from end to end, so it's an Olympic-length pool. And the idea was also, not only obviously does it work during summer, but even in the winter you can cover this length and heat the water, and we're developing the intake of the water so you can actually keep it in the water and heat it. And so you actually have a covered, warm pool in the winter, and then leave these 2 things as cold plunges, which would be ridiculous in New York, I think. Back to Archie.
Hey, guys. Yeah, so we're getting to the end, but this is kind of the most important part, I think, right now, is that we got to this place right before that second Kickstarter campaign where we were like, how are we going to convince people to be a part of this with us for the long haul? And at that stage, we realized that this project for sure wasn't about us, that it was about everybody, which great civic architecture is. And so we simply divided the pool up into its bite-sized component, which is this tile, 4-inch by 12-inch tile, that there will be 70,000 of these tiles on Plus Pool when it opens. We're like, well, that's a perfect opportunity for people to own a piece of it. And so that Kickstarter campaign was simply offering up the tile for them to own and have their name on it when they go there. And we wanted this kind of experience that, a father could go and take their son, and when the pool opens, they can say, like, there's your name, like, you helped build this, And the first person to buy a tile was this dude that was like, he wrote us this thing that said, it was like that big wooden plus that we made, and he said something like, I'm giving you this money because I want my son to see that he could build something for New York. And it was like exactly like what we kind of had hoped, super emotional. Dong did this like really beautiful, sexy rendering of, looks like Kim Kardashian, staring out at the landscape of tiles. We got Dong's favorite burrito shop there, Juanita's. It's too hot, it says. And so the result of this campaign was that thousands and thousands and thousands of people got these tiles, and they had fun just kind of putting whatever they wanted on it. And then all of a sudden, all these selfies started appearing all over the internet of people and their tiles. And it was super cool to see this civic architecture project that's in the process of happening become physical kind of right before our eyes. So yeah, like a lot of it is kind of throwing parties. This is the first party we threw last year in front of this awesome carousel. And one of the most amazing things of the night was this Olympic gold medalist, Connor Dwyer, came, and he nervously gave this very long speech. You can see there's like 3 pages there, where he described the fact that he wasn't a great swimmer, and people didn't really believe in him or that he could do it. And then he cited examples of people giving the opportunity or the space to go swim at a pool after school or whatever, and it led to this goddamn gold medal. And that was cool and tearful a little bit, and then Kanye showed up. Everybody's super serious.
I didn't get the memo. I didn't get the memo you weren't supposed to smile.
Yeah, I'm smiling.
I was like,
Yeah. And then Kanye took the gold medal. But he's wearing a plus bracelet, so it's cool. And then kind of at a place that we're at now, which is really exciting, coming to a place like Houston and having friends make projects like this happen in another city and see that there's an issue with wanting to be able to swim in a waterway all over the world. But quite often, these waters are contaminated. It's actually, in America alone, 18 out of the 20 metropolitan cities that are on water literally shit into their water and they can't swim in it, which is kind of an insane thing. It's not like, maybe it's not the most important thing in the world, but it's kind of a crazy thing, and it's something that's worth solving. It's something that's worth building excitement around. And so that excitement's been growing insane. Like, these highlighted cities are just cities that asked for Plus Pool in their cities, but all of them on this list could use something like it, or at least not deploy the shit into the water. So we're kind of joining this kind of network of people that are really excited about urban swimming. This is Badeschiff in Berlin. We actually just had lunch with a woman from a project in Berlin called Flussbad, where they're trying to actually create a whole section of the river and make it swimmable. This is in Copenhagen. This is Big's Harbor Bath, which is super fun. It's just basically a deck around a piece of water, and it says, you can swim here. The city of Copenhagen, they actually had the same problem, and then 40 years ago, they started making an effort to change it. And then around the 80s and 90s, nobody would jump into the water, even though it was clean, because they thought of it as this kind of strange border, like Don was saying about Brooklyn and Manhattan. And so they designed this place that was just a simple deck. It said you could jump in, and then people did, and now it's so popular that people just jump in the river. And then hopefully this project will exist very soon. And then another really important thing, obviously, is that, you can talk about this if you want.
I'll fly through this super quick. I keep forgetting this is in it. So one of the parts, besides just wanting to do the stuff we want to do, was basically flipping what your typical client-driven process would be on its head. We sort of realized we were doing this where we were basically driving everything through design, and the project's really funny in that way, where the design came first and then the team came, and then now we're actually, obviously funding is coming, but we're in the middle, almost ending actually the site selection phase. And it's a very weird experience to basically be able to choose where your project should go. I don't know if we'll ever be part of another project that has that kind of opportunity, but we can literally go to developers or get approached by different parts of the city and say yes or no, we like or don't like your site, which is a very odd position to be in. But what's amazing about it is that it retains what's important about the design always. We never have to sacrifice the kind of core of the design, no matter what happens through all these other phases. You want to end it with anything?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um,